My name is Ernie Kleinman. In the last segment, we discussed bending the tenor ukulele sides with using a watt-low heater and a jig. The sides have been sitting in the mold overnight, and today we're going to be discussing blocks, kerfing, and side bracing. So I'll start with the blocks. Typically I'll make a block out of basswood, spruce, willow, or some other type of softwood. In this piece here for the front block, I've got two pieces laminated together with a piece of 1/8 of an inch Baltic birch plywood on the top and the bottom, so that when I'm gluing the top and the bottom together, I've got long grain against long grain instead of end grain against long grain, because end grain is much more difficult to glue to the top and the back. So typically what I will do is I'll put the front block in, have marked out my center line of the block over here, and I will line it up with the center line of the sides and the mold inside the mold. For the back piece, I'll typically use a piece of basswood, poplar, birch, spruce, cedar, about 5/8 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch thick, and the same height as the sides, which in this case is about 70 millimeters. I'll also mark a center line out here and then line it up with the center line of the jig, and then I will clamp it together. And I strongly recommend using a piece of wax paper to hold everything together, because there's inevitably will be glue drips and spills. So you might want to put a piece of wax paper between your sides and your mold, so that when you finish gluing the blocks together, the sides do not inadvertently glue themselves to your mold. And then I'll use either these small Chinese F clamps or these plastic ones over here to glue them together, and I'll demonstrate in a mock-up right over here. I'll take this together and I will glue it together, line it up again with the center, and start clamping it down. Make sure that your outside radius of your block matches the radius of your sides. Same thing on the front. Make sure that your block matches the outside radius of your top here, the top block, and your sides, and then clamp together from this angle in and lock it down. Push it in. I usually also use a piece of newspaper underneath to catch any and all glue drips that might come out of the blocks, because it's also worth using when you're putting in the kerfing. I also strongly recommend that you work upside down. In this sequence over here, we've got the back side facing up with the tapered angle over here, and the bottom, which is flat over here, is the top. So we're basically working upside down. And it's a good idea to work on a flat surface so you can always reference your work. Otherwise everything will turn out very lumpy and wavy. The next step over here, after you've glued your clamps together and blocks together, I would strongly recommend using kerfing. Now, for the back kerfing, which is what we're showing over here, you can use either a curved kerfing like this one over here. It's got cuts every 3/16 or 1/4 of an inch, almost right down to the end, about 32nd of an inch or less than a millimeter. Or you can use over here kerfing that is just a straight piece of willow. In this case you can use willow, spruce, or basswood. This is about 1/2 an inch by about 2 millimeters thick, or just over around 3/32 of an inch thick for the kerfing. Also bent on the watt-low heater to shape to the outside, I should say inside circumference of the tenor ukulele, right inside over here. You just bend it on the ukulele jig, outside jig, with your watt-low heater, and then have it conform on the inside. So there's many ways of doing the same operation. Also, there's quite a few different kinds of clamps that are used. I've got just a demonstration here, many different kinds of spring clamps that I use to get this stuff into shape and mold it to the sides. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are office spring clamps which you can buy at a stationery store. They also work, although not quite as well as I would like them to. And last but not least, a traditional tiny small C-clamp when I have a particularly difficult piece that doesn't want to conform to the shape of the sides. Now, once you've finished doing the back, this is the sequence I do it. Once you finish kerfing the back, you want to flip your mold over and you can start kerfing the top. And you can go through the same sequence again. You can use your Watt-Low radius jig to bend your strips for the top. You can use kerfing again, or the traditional Spanish method is to use these little tiny blocks. These are made out of basswood. You can use cedar or pine or even mahogany. These are about approximately 4 millimeters thick and about a 1/2 inch long and about a 1/2 inch wide. And typically I will use high glue to glue these to the tops. These are traditional little tiny glue blocks, and the Spanish word for them I believe is called tentellones. And the reason I like to use hide glue is I could just press it on there and leave it there with a very fast clamp, and it'll probably set in about a minute. The other glues, like white glue, takes at least an hour to set, and this other glue that I'm using now, Gorilla White Glue, will set in about 15 to 20 minutes depending on your room temperature. You can also use Tite Bond, One, Elmer's, and a host of other white and yellow glues that will also work for this job. So typically the way I construct it is I use these little blocks for the top and either curved lining for the back or the bent straight lining for the back. So you could mix them up either way as you prefer. Experiment and see which one works for you. Another little thing that I like to do is if I notice that the sides are not perfect, they might be a little rippled on the inside or the outside, I like to add these little tiny blocks, usually about 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch, and whatever length you want to set them in between your kerf linings on the inside of the sides. Basically put them in like this and then glue them together using a suitable clamp. In this case I'll use one of these spring clamps. Won't work, so I'll take one of these F clamps and slowly I will glue them. Typically I will glue them to the bout, the inside bout over here, okay, or these are the places that get knocked, so it's basically a reinforcement for the sides so they don't get out of shape or get accidentally knocked around. And they'll usually be put over here at the lower bout, in the center bout, and in the top bout right over here in the corner between the block and the middle bout over here. And also, you can also purchase these clamps, which I find extremely handy for gluing in the blocks. Typically on sale they'll come out, I found this is not a plug for them, but you can find these sometimes at Harbor Freight on sale for $2, and frankly they're a bargain because they're very, very useful in the shop. Other nice little tools to have are a good square to line up your blocks, and you try to get as many spring clamps as you can to do the kerfing. You can never have enough spring clamps. So the reason I mention it is because there's an old adage in woodworking, you can never have too many clamps. And there's nothing worse than running out of clamps while you're in the middle of doing a glue job and frantically running around looking for a clamp to do the work at the last second. And that concludes our segment on blocks, kerfing, and side blocks. Thank you.